Hello everyone, let us understand the latest changes in regards to inflation measurement in India. So at a producer level, currently to measure inflation, you have the Wholesale Price Index. However, the government wants to replace that with PPI or the Producer Price Index. Now, inflation typically is a very important topic from the examination standpoint, and now because you have these changes which are going to be introduced, this is a very important video when in regards to your prelims as well as the mains examination. So the way the government wants to do this is that for the next 5 years, the government is going to publish both WPI and PPI, and after 5 years, what you will have is that the government will start publishing any data on WPI and you will only have PPI as a measure of inflation at a producer level. On the other hand, we know that to measure inflation at the consumer level, you have the Consumer Price Index. Now, one key reason or the key difference between WPI or PPI is that WPI accurately helps capture the point of origin of inflation. So to understand what I mean, let us think of a supply chain for any commodity. So what you will notice is that once goods are manufactured in a factory, the producer sells those goods in bulk quantities to wholesalers or distributors, who then sell these goods in smaller batches to retailers or shopkeepers, and then you have consumers who buy these goods from different retailers or shopkeepers. Now what your WPI tracks is that your WPI tracks the changes which happen at this wholesaler or distributor level. However, through this it becomes very difficult to understand where did inflation originally start from. Now to understand this further, let us take another example. Let us take an example, and this example will help you clearly understand the contrast between what WPI measures and what PPI measures. So let's say you have the whole process of car manufacturing with 3 entities involved. Let's say you have a steel company which is making steel sheets, and then you have an auto parts company which is making engines and doors, and then you have a car company which is buying these parts and assembling the final car to be sold in the market. Let's say the steel company witnesses a 10% rise in the price of its steel sheets which it is selling to the auto parts company. Now once the auto parts company buys these steel sheets at a 10% higher value, the auto parts company could increase the price of the final output by 10%. However, let's say the auto parts company was selling the different parts for 1 lakh rupees in the market. However, it is now selling for 1,08,000 rupees. So what we are witnessing is that while the input cost for the auto parts company has increased by 10%, it has only increased the output cost by 8%. So it has absorbed 2% of the cost. Now there could be multiple reasons why it has done that. Could be the labor cost has stayed the same or the productivity has improved, or could be the factory has just decided to not pass on some of the costs. Similarly, once the car companies buys these inputs at an 8% higher value, it could pass on that final cost to the consumers in terms of the final price of the car. However, let's say the car company increases the car price by only 2%. Now the key reason could be because the car company faces competition and it does not want to lose customers. So what we are witnessing out here is that in the production stage, there was an initial price rise of 10%. However, in terms of the final output, the price rise has only been of 2%. So what PPI is helping you understand is PPI is helping you understand how much of the cost price is actually being passed on at each stage. So it helps policy makers, or PPI is going to help policy makers better gauge how much of the price rise which is originating is being passed downstream to the final consumers. So this is what PPI actually helps you accurately capture. On the other hand, because WPI only captures inflation at a wholesale level, so let's say you had cars in January which were being sold for 10.5 lakhs. However, in the month of Feb, the wholesalers or distributors are now selling the cars for 10.7 lakhs. So at a wholesale level, you have a price rise of 1.9% which is happening. However, this price rise of 1.9% is shedding very little light on where did this price rise originally start from, and we notice that the price rise started from the rise in price of steel sheets. So to better gauge the point of origin, or to better understand where is inflation starting, so that policymakers can accurately understand where they need to make the appropriate interventions, PPI is a much better indicator. So the key reasons why you have PPI, which is used in advanced economies, and it is also recommended by IMF that it should be used in India, is that it helps track supply chain pressure better. That is, it helps one understand where is the inflation originally starting from. Thereby, PPI helps provide a good early warning sign, because if producer prices are rising today, it means that eventually the consumer prices are going to rise. So thereby PPI acts as a good leading indicator so that policymakers can make the appropriate interventions at the right time. The third key reason why PPI should replace WPI is that WPI only measures goods. So WPI is going to measure goods such as steel or cement. However, it's not going to measure services such as banking or IT. Now, if you were to take the context of the Indian economy, where services account for more than 50% of the GDP, so WPI does not accurately capture data on the economy because it's missing out on more than 50 or 55% of the economy. So in order to accurately capture inflation data at the producer level, now the government is going to release the producer price index, and the government has actually started that. On 15th June, you had the first set of data on the producer price index, which was released by the government. Now, the key difference between the data of WPI and PPI is that WPI data used to be released, if you were to look at a Hindu newspaper, as a single consolidated figure. So you would have WPI inflation say as 5.5%. However, in context of PPI, the PPI's data is going to be broken down into three smaller sub indices. That is, you're going to be having three sets of data to help you better measure PPI. So you'll have data on output PPI, that is going to provide information on the prices which the producers are receiving for the final products they are selling in the market. So in our case of car companies, so the price of the car which is sold in the market is going to be the measurement for output PPI. Now, output PPI data is going to be released on a monthly basis. Also, output PPI data does not incorporate any taxes or transport margins or trade margins. So, output PPI is purely and purely the price which the producer gets for the final goods he sells in the market. So, it actually captures price at the factory gate or at a producer level accurately. The second subset of data which is going to be released as part of PPI is the input PPI. Now this is going to help one understand the prices which the producers are paying for different raw materials, in our case for the different engines or doors, as well as for the energy which is being used for producing the final output. Also, the input PPI data is going to be released on a monthly basis. Now, if let's say the input prices are rising and the output prices are not rising in a similar proportion, then the input output PPI data is going to help one better understand, as we did through the car example, understand how much of the cost push margins are being eventually passed on to the consumer. That is, this is going to help one better understand how much of the price rise is eventually being passed on to the consumer. The third and the final set of data which is going to be released as part of PPI is the service PPI. So it's going to measure the price changes in the service sector. Initially, this data is going to be released for 7 categories, that is banking, insurance, telecom, railways, air passenger segment, management of pension funds, and securities transaction. So to take an example, what this data will help one capture is that, let's say that a bank provides payment processing services to a businessman, and it charges rupees 500 for transactions. Now let's say that fee has increased to 550, so there is an increase of 10%. So service PPI is going to help you better understand this sense of price rise which is happening in the service sector. Now the key difference out here is that while the input and output PPI is going to be released on a monthly basis, the service PPI is going to be released on a quarterly basis. So these are the three sets of indices which are going to be released as part of your PPI. Now the final thing we want to understand, or the final fact which one must know in regards to these inflation indices, is that if you talk about your WPI or the PPI, this is released by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, which is under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So you have your Ministry of Commerce and Industry which releases data on WPI and PPI. However, if you talk about inflation or consumer inflation level data, which is CPI rural, urban or combined, that is released by the National Statistical Office within the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So this is an important fact one must remember if there's a statement in the prelims exam. So these were the key facts or key concepts we wanted to understand in regards to the changes which have occurred in regards to inflation measurement. Please subscribe to the channel and do check out the other videos on my channel if you did like this video. Looking forward to seeing you also join me on the playlist or the lecture series I have launched in regards to financial markets. Thank you so much for watching.